When I first moved into Oakridge Estates, it seemed like the perfect neighborhood. Pristine sidewalks, towering oaks, and an air of affluence. But perfection came at a price. The Homeowners Association, led by the notoriously domineering Linda Cartwright, treated the community like her personal kingdom, ruling with an iron fist. Violations weren't just penalized. They were met with swift, merciless enforcement. Residents whispered about the HOA's overreach but dared not resist. I had no intention of getting involved in the neighborhood politics. I paid my fees, followed the rules, and kept to myself. My home was modest compared to grand estates that lined the street, but my backyard was my sanctuary. I had spent months cultivating a peaceful escape, a koi pond shimmering beneath a wooden pergola, a vegetable garden bursting with life, and a well-manicured lawn I tended to with quiet pride. That peace shattered the moment I found the notice pinned to my door. Unapproved landscaping modifications. Removal required within 72 hours. Failure to comply will result in HOA corrective measures. I read the words twice, my jaw tightening. My landscaping had been the same since the day I moved in. There were no prior warnings, no letters of complaint, just this sudden decree. Determined to get answers, I attended the next HOA meeting. The air inside the community center was thick with tension as residents gathered, their complaints ranging from arbitrary fines to forced modifications of their properties. Linda sat at the head of the long conference table, her sharp gaze surveying the room like a monarch granting audience. When my turn came, I stood, holding the notice aloft. I'd like to know why I've been ordered to remove my landscaping when it's been unchanged since I moved in. Linda folded her hands, her red-painted nails tapping against the polished wood. Oakridge Estates maintains a uniform aesthetic. Your yard's modifications don't comply with the latest HOA standards. I frowned. What new standards? I wasn't informed of any changes. She smiled, a predatory glint in her eyes. The board approved them last week. It's your responsibility to stay updated. Anger burned in my chest. And if I refuse? She shrugged. Then corrective action will be taken. A murmur spread through the room, but no one spoke in my defense. They knew what I was only beginning to understand. Challenging Linda meant war. 2 days later, war arrived in the form of a construction crew. I woke to the sound of heavy machinery groaning outside my window. Rushing to my backyard, I froze at the sight before me. Workers in reflective vests were pouring concrete over my lawn. My koi pond had already been filled in, the fish gone. My vegetable garden, flattened beneath a layer of gray sludge. Fury surged through me as I stormed toward the foreman. Stop this immediately. He barely glanced at me. HOA orders. Linda emerged from my side gate, arms crossed. I told you, corrective action would be taken. I stared at her in disbelief. This is illegal. You can't just destroy my property. She smirked. Actually, I can. The bylaws grant the HOA authority to make structural improvements in communal interest. We've decided to build a holding facility for repeat offenders and security threats. And unfortunately, your yard was the only viable space. I clenched my fists, my breath coming in sharp bursts. You mean a jail? In a suburban neighborhood. She tilted her head. Call it what you want, but I assure you it's well within our rights. For the first time, true fear flashed across her face. Something in my voice unsettled her. Good. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I had spent years operating in the shadows, handling threats far greater than an overzealous HOA. And if Linda thought she could steamroll me like she had the others, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. This was no longer about my backyard. This was war. The destruction of my yard wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a declaration of war. I wasn't the type to take orders, especially not from a self-important dictator in a power suit. Linda had made a mistake. She assumed I was like the rest of the residents, easily intimidated and eager to comply. She had no idea what I was capable of. I spent years in intelligence work, dismantling organizations far more dangerous than a tyrannical HOA. And now, I was going to dismantle hers. Step one was information gathering. I needed to understand the HOA's inner workings, how decisions were made, who held influence, and where they were vulnerable. I started small, speaking with neighbors, feigning concern while extracting key details. I learned that most of the board members disliked Linda, but were too afraid to challenge her. I learned about the fines, the financial discrepancies, the unapproved security fund that had been siphoning money from the community. Then I went deeper. Using a few discrete tools from my former life, I accessed public records, financial transactions, and internal emails. The more I uncovered, the uglier it got. Linda wasn't just power-hungry, she was corrupt. The so-called security fund was a slush fund, financing her extravagant vacations, designer wardrobe, and even a private gym built inside her home. And the so-called holding facility in my backyard? A front to justify increased security fees. Step 2 was infiltration. I needed to turn Linda's allies into liabilities. I started with Richard, the HOA treasurer. I orchestrated a casual encounter, bringing up some of my own fabricated concerns about HOA finances. When he hesitated, I casually mentioned the audit I had initiated through an anonymous tip to the state's homeowners regulatory board. His face went pale. Within a week, he resigned, his sudden departure sending shockwaves through the community. Next was Miranda, Linda's right-hand enforcer. I strategically spread rumors among the board members that Linda was blaming Miranda for the financial mismanagement. Paranoia did the rest. Miranda turned on Linda before Linda could turn on her. With the HOA crumbling from within, it was time for the final phase. I set up an emergency board meeting under the guise of a major legal development. Everyone, including Linda, arrived at the community center, expecting to discuss damage control. Instead, they found state investigators and law enforcement officers waiting for them. Linda barely had time to react before they presented her with the evidence: fraud, embezzlement, and unauthorized property destruction. She sputtered, denied, then raged. But there was no escape, and as they led her away in handcuffs, I leaned in and whispered, "Next time, pick your battles more carefully." For the first time since I moved in, Oakridge Estates felt like home again. But I wasn't finished just yet, not by a long shot. With Linda in handcuffs and the HOA in chaos, I knew the battle was far from over. The community was in shock. Whispers filled the streets. Neighbors who had once cowered under Linda's rule now stood in uncertain anticipation. But I wasn't about to let things settle quietly. I had dismantled Linda's empire, but now I had to ensure it never rose again. The first thing I did was ensure that every single resident in Oakridge Estates received a full dossier of Linda's corruption. I mailed anonymous packets to every doorstep detailing the embezzlement, the fraudulent security fund, and her illegal dealings. HOA board members who had previously been silent now found themselves in the crosshairs of an outraged community. Then came the press. Local news outlets picked up the story after an anonymous tip from me, of course. Soon, headlines blasted across social media. HOA president arrested in fraud scandal. Suburban nightmare unfolds. Homeowners revolt. HOA tyrant faces criminal charges. Linda had built her power on fear. But fear was a double-edged sword, and now it was cutting her down piece by piece. But I wasn't done yet. I had one last move to play. One that would ensure no HOA in this town ever underestimated its residents again. A few days after Linda's arrest, a town meeting was called. The HOA board, now decimated by resignations and suspensions, was forced to confront the consequences of their actions. The room was packed, not just with homeowners eager to air their grievances, but with journalists, attorneys, and curious onlookers who had caught wind of the scandal. The once powerful HOA had crumbled to its knees, and the residents were ready for blood. I stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, watching unfold. Linda, despite being behind bars, still managed to loom over proceedings. Her influence was palpable, even in absence. I had no doubt that there were those still loyal to her, people who would try to protect her or, at the very least, maintain the status quo. I couldn't afford for that to happen. As the meeting wore on, it became clear that a significant portion of the board wanted to shift the blame entirely to Linda. They were eager to distance themselves from her reign of terror, but I saw through their performance. They had all been complicit in her schemes, either directly or through their silence. The press was hungry for more, and I could feel the tide of public opinion turning against them. Finally, it was my turn to speak. I stood and walked to the front, my gaze sweeping over the crowd. The room fell into an uneasy silence. I was just one resident among many, but I was the one who had started this fire. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice steady, we've all suffered under Linda Cartwright's rule, but the question we need to ask now is, who else has been complicit in her actions? This HOA, from top to bottom, is rotten. It's not just Linda. The entire structure has been corrupt for years. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. I'm not here for justice alone. I'm here to make sure this never happens again. We need a new foundation, one that's built on transparency, fairness, and accountability. We need an HOA that serves us, not the other way around. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. I could see the shift in the air. People were ready for change, and I intended to lead it. But I had another plan in mind. As the meeting came to a close, I watched the remaining board members scramble. They were trying to salvage whatever credibility they had left, offering platitudes about reform and promises of accountability. But they weren't fooling anyone. I had already reached out to a lawyer. The next step was a class action lawsuit. It was time to take the HOA to court, not just for me, but for everyone who had been wronged by Linda and her cronies. It was a long shot, but I knew I could win. The evidence was too overwhelming. The community too united in its outrage. The lawsuit would expose the full extent of the corruption. It would force the HOA to reform or face total dissolution. I wasn't just seeking retribution. I was ensuring that Oakridge Estates would never again be held hostage by tyrants in power. Weeks passed, and the pressure mounted. News outlets continued to cover the scandal, and the HOA's reputation sank lower with each passing day. The board members who had once been untouchable were now under investigation, their shady dealings laid bare for the public to see. And then came the final blow. The city council, after reviewing the evidence and the overwhelming public support for change, voted to revoke the HOA's authority over Oakridge Estates. It was a historic decision, one that would set a precedent for homeowners associations across the city. Linda, still sitting in jail, had no idea what was coming next. By the time she was released on bail, the HOA she had worked so hard to build and manipulate was nothing more than a memory. I watched the city council vote on the decision, a quiet satisfaction filling me. This was the culmination of months of planning, maneuvering, and sheer will. The community that had once been afraid of Linda Cartwright and her tyrannical grip on power had risen up, and I had led the charge. As the final votes were tallied, I felt a sense of closure. The system that had once worked against me and so many others was finally gone. Oakridge Estates was free. Free from corruption, free from fear, and most importantly, free from Linda Cartwright. And I, once just another resident, was now its quiet hero. The victory over Linda Cartwright had come too easily. I had expected a fight, an uphill battle against a powerful enemy, but it turned out that Oakridge Estates was more fragile than I had thought. One moment, Linda was ruling with an iron fist, and the next, she was carted away in disgrace, leaving a gaping hole in the HOA's power structure. For a brief moment, I basked in the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had dismantled her empire. I walked through the neighborhood, a hero in the eyes of many. The people who had once whispered behind closed doors now came up to thank me, express their relief, and even congratulate me. It felt good, better than I had anticipated. But something gnawed at me. The victory was hollow. Without Linda's tyrannical rule, the HOA should have crumbled, and Oakridge Estate should have returned to the peaceful place I'd hoped it would be when I first moved in. But it wasn't. The absence of Linda created a void, and in that void, something darker began to grow. The residents were no longer afraid of the HOA, but they were also lost. There was no direction, no leadership. They needed someone to fill the power vacuum, someone to guide them, and I wasn't sure I was the one to do it. Then I got the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, the kind that didn't stand out among the bills and advertisements. I almost tossed it aside, but something in my gut told me to open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in an elegant looping script. Dear resident of Oakridge Estates, I hope this letter finds you well. I am aware of your recent efforts in dismantling the HOA's previous regime. While I cannot say that I am pleased with your methods, I cannot deny that you have made a powerful impression. There are those among us who believe in a different kind of leadership for this community, one that is not rooted in corruption or fear. If you are interested in hearing more, I would suggest we meet in person. The future of Oakridge Estates could be in your hands. The signature at the bottom was simply initials, AT. I had no idea who AT was, but the tone of the letter was clear. This wasn't a simple message of gratitude or thank you. It was a summons, an invitation into something larger than just the HOA. It suggested there were forces at work behind the scenes that I hadn't even considered. The letter weighed on me. I could have ignored it. I could have shrugged it off, walked away, and let Oakridge Estates rebuild itself in its own time. But curiosity, along with the faint, nagging feeling that I wasn't quite done, drove me to make contact. I needed to know more. A week later, I found myself standing in front of an old, weather house at the edge of the neighborhood. It was well kept but had an air of secrecy about it, tucked away behind overgrown hedges. I wasn't sure what to expect, but when the door opened, I knew I was standing on the threshold of something I couldn't walk away from. A man in his early 50s greeted me, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his eyes sharp and calculating. He offered me a firm handshake. "I'm Adrian Thomas," he said. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "Adrian Thomas?" I asked, still unsure where this was going. "Are you a part of the HOA?" He chuckled softly. "I was, in a sense, but not in the way you might think. I'm part of something much older, much more influential than the HOA. Oakridge Estates was built on certain ideals that have been lost over time. It's time we return to those principles." I frowned, feeling a strange mixture of skepticism and intrigue. "I'm not sure I follow." Thomas stepped aside, allowing me to enter. His house was modest but well-appointed, with shelves lined with books on history, law, and obscure philosophy. There were no photos of family, no personal touches, just rows of books, each one with a name and number scrawled across the spine. "We," Thomas began, before pausing to choose his words carefully. "We believe that the HOA at its core was a necessary mechanism for controlling the community, but it was misused, corrupted. Now, what remains is a shell of its former self. We believe in something different, something that addresses the issues you've already started to dismantle. Control, yes, but in a way that serves the greater good." "Greater good," I repeated, feeling a cold chill spread through me. "You sound like the same thing Linda Cartwright was saying before all of this went down." Thomas didn't flinch. She was a symptom, not the disease. The HOA's problems went much deeper than her leadership. It's about the very structure of the community, who controls it and why. I sat down on one of the leather chairs, trying to make sense of the man's cryptic words. "What are you proposing? What exactly do you want from me?" He leaned forward, his eyes locking with mine. "You've proven yourself capable. You took down Linda Cartwright. Now, I want to offer you a chance to help rebuild Oakridge Estates, not through the corrupt system of the past, but something more effective." I felt a rush of adrenaline. There was something dangerous in his words, something that made my instincts flare. This wasn't just about an HOA anymore. There was something much larger at play, and I was being pulled into it whether I liked it or not. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I asked. Thomas smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. "I'm asking you to join us. We need someone like you, someone who understands how to bring about real change. Together, we can control this community, shape it in a way that aligns with our vision." I stood up, my heart pounding. "Control? That's what you're after?" "We're not here to dominate, but to lead," he replied smoothly. "It's time Oakridge Estates was restored to its true purpose. You understand the importance of leadership. Now, let us help you lead it properly." I turned toward the door, my mind racing. This was not what I had expected. What had I just stepped into? As I left his house, one thought echoed through my mind. I had just uncovered another layer of the mystery. And in doing so, I had only scratched the surface of what Oakridge Estates truly was. The next few days felt like a blur. Adrian Thomas's offer gnawed at my mind, digging into every corner of my thoughts. I couldn't ignore the invitation. I had already stepped too far into this world to turn back. The more I pondered, the more it seemed as though this was the only real way forward. Linda had shown me the dangers of unchecked power, but Thomas, with his calm demeanor and careful words, promised something different, something that seemed almost righteous in its intent. But still, there was something off about him. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than I was being told. It was like watching a magician's sleight of hand. You could see the trick, but you couldn't quite grasp the hidden motives. The invitation kept haunting me, and when I returned to my own home, I found a thick envelope waiting for me. Inside was another letter, but this one had no return address. It was a simple, typed message. You're being watched. It's in your best interest to make the right choice. Don't forget who really holds the power here. I shivered as I read the words. Was this a threat? A warning? I felt like I was tangled in something I couldn't see clearly, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to trust anyone. The HOA was still reeling from Linda's downfall, but now, this mysterious figure in the shadows, Adrian Thomas, was poised to step into the void. Could he truly be trusted? I decided to confront Thomas. I had to know what he was really offering, what was behind that cryptic proposition. I couldn't risk blindly following him, but my gut told me he had the answers I needed. The next evening, I found myself at his house once again. The door opened quickly, as if he'd been expecting me. I knew you'd come, he said, his voice smooth but tinged with something I couldn't place. Anticipation? Control? I wasn't sure. Why me? I asked, stepping inside. The room seemed colder this time, the shadows longer, the air heavier. What makes you think I'll join you? You still haven't explained what you're after. He motioned for me to sit, and I reluctantly did. This time, there was no charm in his smile, no pretense, just the barest flicker of something darker beneath the surface. I've been watching you for a while, he said, his voice lower now. You've got fire, determination. You think differently. The kind of person who understands how things really work. His eyes bored into mine. That's why I think you'll come to see the truth. What truth? I demanded. That you want to control this place like Linda did? Because that's what it sounds like. He didn't flinch, didn't even look taken aback. His expression hardened into something more calculating. Control is a strong word. But yes, leadership, real leadership, is about control. It's about guiding people to do what's best for them, even when they don't see it themselves. So, you think you know what's best for everyone here? I challenged, my anger rising. You want to replace one tyrant with another? Thomas's smile returned, but it wasn't comforting. I don't want to replace anyone. I want to build something. Oakridge Estates, under the right leadership, can be something far more than it ever was under Linda. We can be a model for the future. I leaned forward, my voice sharp. By what? Stripping people their autonomy. Telling them what they can and can't do. No, not telling them, he replied smoothly, but leading them, just as I'm leading you now. The words hung in the air like a challenge. I felt it then, the same manipulation I had seen in Linda, only this time it was wrapped in a veneer of sophistication. I wasn't dealing with some amateur, power-hungry woman. Thomas was an expert. He didn't need brute force. He needed influence, persuasion, and most importantly, loyalty. Why don't you just tell me the truth, Adrian? I asked, feeling a growing sense of unease. What do you want from me? He stood up, walking toward a large map of the neighborhood pinned to the wall. He traced a finger along the edges of the streets, the roads, the houses. I want you to understand what this community can become. The rules, the HOA, they're just tools. Tools to shape the people into something greater. We can have a society that works with people, that protects them from themselves. But it needs vision. It needs someone to make the tough decisions, to shape the narrative. I stare at the map, suddenly feeling small and insignificant in this grand scheme. And you think that person is you? Thomas didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to face me, his eyes cold and calculating. I don't think it. I know it. You're not the first person I've approached. I've made my offers to others in this community, but none of them have the vision, the strength, the conviction you do. I stood, my heart pounding. So what now? You want me to join you? To become part of your little power play. He smiled again, a slow, deliberate gesture. Not just join, no. I want you to lead with me. The future of Oakridge Estates can be shaped in our image. We can build a society that's as close to perfection as anyone could hope for, but only if you're willing to play your part. His words hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. It was too much, too fast. And yet, I could feel the pull, the temptation, the power he was offering. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to storm out, to refuse and leave this behind. But another part of me, the part that had taken down Linda Cartwright, wanted to stay, to see this through, to find out where it would lead. I'll think about it, I said, though I wasn't sure that was a lie or the truth. Thomas's smile widened. I knew you would. Take your time, but remember, time is a luxury we don't have. As I left his house, the weight of his words pressed heavily on my chest. I had a choice to make, but neither option seemed like a true escape. I was already in deeper than I realized, and I wasn't sure I could get out. The days after my meeting with Adrian Thomas felt like a slow unraveling. I couldn't shake the sense of dread that had settled over me, like a thick fog that clouded every thought. The choice seemed clear enough on the surface. Align myself with Thomas, rise to power alongside him, or continue fighting against the system and watch it crumble once more. But the more I thought about it, the more impossible the decision became. I was no longer just a resident of Oakridge Estates. I had become a player in a larger game, a game with stakes far higher than I had ever imagined. Thomas's words haunted me. You're not the first person I've approached. I've made my offers to others in this community, but none of them have the vision, the strength, the conviction you do. He had seen something in me, something I hadn't fully understood myself, but it was undeniable. I was in position to lead. But at what cost? The power he offered me was tempting, intoxicating. The idea of shaping Oakridge Estates, of turning it into something better, more perfect, free from the chaos and fear that Linda Cartwright had brought. It was an alluring vision. Yet, I couldn't ignore the darker implications of Thomas's words. Was he truly interested in a better future for the community, or was this just another power grab, another attempt to control and manipulate? I decided I needed to see it through, to understand what I was really dealing with. I called Thomas and set up another meeting. This time, I was determined to get the answers I needed. I wasn't going to walk into this blindly. I had learned too much to trust easily, and I wasn't about to become part of something I didn't understand. When I arrived at his house, the atmosphere was different. The door opened before I could knock, as if he had been waiting for me. There was no pleasantries this time, no soft smiles. Thomas was all business. I assume you've made your decision? He asked, his voice calm, but there was an underlying tension in his tone. I need to understand more, I said, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. What exactly is it that you want from me? Thomas motioned for me to sit, his eyes never leaving mine. I've already told you. I want you to lead with me. Together, we can reshape this community, get the structure and stability it needs. You saw what happened when Linda fell. There was no one left to pick up the pieces. But you and I, we can build something stronger. You're the one who took down Linda. You're the one who has the power to lead. I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me. He was right. I had taken down Linda Cartwright, and now the vacuum she left behind was waiting for someone to fill it. But did I want to be that person? Did I want to step into the role of leader and risk becoming just another tyrant, another pawn in a much larger game? What makes you think you're the right person to lead? I asked, needing to know more. What's really behind all of this? Why not just let Oakridge Estates rebuild itself? Thomas stood, walking toward the window and gazing out at the quiet neighborhood. Rebuilding itself is a fantasy. You know as well as I do that Oakridge Estates is broken. The HOA system is flawed, corrupt. Linda was just a symptom. But the real problem is that the community has lost its way. It needs guidance. It needs control. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words settle into my bones. And you think you're the one to provide that control? I don't think it. I know it, he replied firmly. The question is, do you want to be a part of it? Do you want to help me build something that lasts, something that works? I was silent for a long moment, my mind racing. Every instinct told me to walk away, to refuse him and keep fighting against the system. But another part of me, the part that fought so hard to bring down Linda, felt the lure's offer. I wanted change. I wanted something better for Oakridge Estates. Was this my chance to make that vision reality? I stood up, feeling the weight of the decision settle in my chest. What happens if I say no? Thomas's smile returned, but it wasn't a warm, inviting smile from before. It was sharp, calculating. If you refuse, then nothing changes. Oakridge Estates will continue to fall apart. The community will be fractured, divided. There will be no peace, no direction. You've seen it. You've seen how people are looking for someone to lead them. You've seen the chaos. You can either help us rebuild, or you can watch it burn. His words echoed in my mind. Watch it burn. There it was, the final ultimatum. The choice was no longer just about power. It was about responsibility. Could I live with the consequences of doing nothing? I stepped toward the door, my heart pounding. I'll think about it. Thomas didn't try to stop me. He simply nodded, his expression unreadable. Take your time. But remember, time is not something we have in abundance. As I walked out his house, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. Oakridge Estates wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It was a battlefield. And now, I had to decide which side I was on. The streets outside were quiet, peaceful. It almost seemed absurd that so much turmoil could be hidden behind these walls. But I knew better now. This was no longer just about the HOA. It was about power, who controlled it, who wielded it, and who paid the price for it. I had one chance to make the right choice. And for the first time since I'd come to Oakridge Estates, I didn't know what that choice would be.